Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and this week's plant of the week is Epipremnum pinnatum Cebu blue, commonly referred to as the Cebu blue pothos. This is a relatively new plant on the market, and it's gained a lot of popularity over the last couple years, and it's had an availability and price point that kind of reflects that popularity. However, at this point in time, at least in my area of the United States, this plant has become a little bit more readily available, and the pricing has become a little bit more appropriate. Still not inexpensive by any means, but much more inexpensive than it's been in the last couple years. This plant is very closely related to the standard golden pothos, or Epipremnum aureum. This is just a different species of Epipremnum, this one being pinnatum, pinnatum referring to the pinnate leaf shape that the mature leaves of this plant get. So they get kind of serrated and more look like a palm frond in comparison to these juvenile leaves, which are just a standard leaf. Definitely a little bit more thinner in the width in comparison to the standard golden pothos or Epipremnum aureum, so just something to note there. But as these leaves do mature or they grow up a tree is when they're going to get those serrated leaves that I'm referring to. However, we are much more used to growing this plant for its juvenile foliage, which is absolutely beautiful and definitely carries a little bit more of this blue glaucous hue in its juvenile form than it does in its mature form. And it also gets its name Cebu blue because not only is this plant blue, but it's native to the Cebu island in the Philippines. This plant can withstand a wide array of different sunlight scenarios, from low light to high light. Of course, this is still a tropical rainforest plant, so a bright south-facing window is probably going to fry this plant regardless of the fact that these leaves are more blue and silver and more comparable to a succulent that has that lovely bluish hue to it that can absolutely get fried. These leaves are still paper thin and they will not handle that sunlight scenario very well. But an east-facing window, west-facing window is totally fine. North-facing window is fantastic. I'm growing this one a couple feet away from the east-facing window. It is in the vicinity of a grow light, and I do have another one hanging up in my home, a couple feet once again away from an east-facing window, and they all seem to be doing fantastic. If you put them in a lower light corner of your home, it might become a little bit more green and lose kind of that glaucous hue that this plant has. It does need a little bit more light to stay most vibrant, but if you are growing this plant in a bright, indirect area of your home, I think these new leaves are still going to come in with this beautiful blue glaucous color. Just like a golden pothos, this is a very, very easy plant to water. It is a plant that you can be very lackadaisical with. You can probably water it roughly once a week, and that's probably the routine that you're going to find yourself in. But if you are a little bit more forgetful, like me, when it comes to watering your plants, this one has a very good telltale sign in the leaves when it needs water. It's just going to wilt very slightly. It's just going to become a little bit more limp, and you're going to see very clearly, especially if it's hanging up from your ceiling, that this plant is going to need some water. It's going to look very, very wilted. So go ahead and give it a drink within a day or two of noticing that wilt, and it's going to perk right back up in a day's time and look just as it did when it was well watered. So it's kind of best to err on a little bit more of the underwatering side when it comes to these. If you go too far on underwatering, you are going to have this plant probably have some of these leaves from the like crown of the pot start to turn yellow and brown and maybe fall off due to the inconsistent watering. And that's something you're also going to notice if you are watering your plant too often. So if you are still watering this plant when it's a little too moist, it's not going to be able to hold on to that moisture, and it's going to kind of expel that moisture by causing some of these lower leaves to kind of turn yellow and rot a little bit, maybe get a little bit slimy, and they'll fall off. So do be mindful there. But if you're seeing a little bit more than one leaf yellowing at a time, you might need to reconsider the watering habits that you have with this plant. This is a plant that's going to thrive in the standard household temperature, so think 60 to 80 degrees. And you can fertilize your Epipremnum pinnatum Cebu blue in the spring and summertime. I usually only fertilize my plants once I've had them in the same soil for a full growing season, just because there's plenty of nutrients in fresh soil, but once it's been a full growing season, that's when it starts to become a little bit more depleted, and it's going to definitely help aid in the growth and keep these leaves looking as beautiful as possible. And also in this plant specific case, keep this plant from shooting off some kind of like leafless tendrils. As you can see, this one kind of skipped a leaf right here, possibly due to light situations, possibly due to fertilizer, but as this plant becomes less happy with its conditions, it might start to shoot off some runners that are just vines that are kind of leafless. They don't have leaves on them, and it's not because the leaves have fallen off, it's because leaves never grew in the first place. And you can kind of assess whether you need to give your plant a little bit more light or perhaps fertilize your plant. So I think in this case, I think I need to be fertilizing this because I planted this up probably about a year and a half ago at this point in this lovely kind of Statue of Liberty blue-green-esque planter that I actually made myself back when I did pottery, but I just thought this color really complemented this lovely blue glaucous color that this houseplant sports. And last but not least, propagating this houseplant is very, very simple. It's the same exact method that you propagate your standard golden pothos or any philodendron that you're working with, where you just take a cutting in between two nodes. So a node is where a leaf is going to come off the stem, and you're going to notice that it has this little nub, root nublet, which is the node. And as long as you have maybe one or two nodes, you will be able to successfully propagate your houseplants. One node is totally fine. However, I do find with some of these vining houseplants that some nodes here and there are inactive, meaning that they're not going to root and they're not going to put off new growth. So better safe than sorry, and to take two nodes at the minimum, but it doesn't even need a growing tip, so you can just take a couple cuttings here and there, and they will put off new growth at the top where you cut it, or perhaps below. All plants are different, but as long as you have one or two nodes on your cuttings, I think that you're going to have some good success with propagating this houseplant. In fact, this is a plant right here that I completely grew from a couple cuttings. I think this is just 2 or 3 cuttings that I planted up in here, like I said, about a year and a half ago, and it's kind of put off a couple new shoots here and there from the base and kind of filled out quite nicely here. So now I have this really lovely Cebu blue pothos that I just completely made from another one that I had in my home. So that's gonna do it for today's video. Care guide on how to grow Epipremnum pinnatum Cebu blue. Tune in next week for the next episode of Plant of the Week. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Philly Foliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.